Welcome to the AVNet Engineering Roundtable on prototyping. At AVNet, we understand that you, the OEM, can spend a lot of time, money and effort at the prototype stage. So we thought it'd be helpful to get some of our engineers around the table and talk about prototyping and their experience of helping customers like you with their prototyping stages, getting their products to market faster. So let me ask to introduce themselves in no particular order. Let's start with John.
Hi, my name's John Cooper. I'm a technical manager in the UK for AVNet Abacus, and I've been at AVNet since 2004.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. Brian?
Hi, my name is Brian Willis. I'm a technical solutions engineer here at AVNet. My background is in firmware development, and I managed firmware teams and projects for a long time before coming to AVNet about 4 years ago.
Great to see you. Thanks. Matt.
Yeah, Matt Brown, AVNet, based here in the U.S., just outside Boulder, Colorado. Part of a smaller R&D group within AVNet, and we're focused on bringing prototype platforms, which I guess is perfect for this forum, prototype and production platforms around 5G and millimeter wave solutions, trying to help people adopt new technology in that space.
Fantastic. And Wally, you're muted, by the way.
Hi, my name is Wallace. I'm the local FAE here in the Bay Area. I came to AVNet around 2012, and I've had through my entire career, it's been customer facing, helping them with design and prototype. I've been in the industry for 20 plus years.
Fantastic. Great to see you. And Thomas.
Yeah, Thomas Kupfer, my name. I'm area technical manager for sensors and wireless with AVNet Abacus in Germany. I'm responsible for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. I've been with the company for 18 years now, and been in the industry for some and 30 years.
More than you like to mention.
Yep.
And I think last but of course not least, Milan.
Hi, I'm Milan from EBV Technical Support Center. I'm working as an engineer, and I'm responsible for the high-end processing applications. In September, it will be 3 years so far, how long I'm in EBV. And before joining EBV, I was a hardware design engineer working on PCBs with various MPSOCs, FPGAs, and other high-speed interfaces. Thank you.
Great to see you. Great, thanks everyone for taking the time. So we're talking about prototypes and prototyping and what it means to OEMs. But I thought, we don't want to make any assumptions with people watching the video. So it'd be good if we can just start at the beginning, I suppose, and describe what the word prototype means to you. So to me, prototype means the first of its kind. But that's very broad. It's not very specific. Maybe you can each give us your definition of what prototype means to you.
So for me, prototyping is an important step when there's a lot of risk in the project, right? If there's a lot of unknowns and you don't necessarily know how to solve the problem or how to interface with some new hardware or system, often a prototype is going to help you learn about that and help you, understand if the project is even feasible in some instances. That's what it's for me.
So you're kind of mixing proof of concept with prototype in a way, I guess.
I am, yeah, because I think that a lot of times we do really hard things, right? And sometimes we think it's feasible, but we don't necessarily know that it is. And for me, prototyping is that's how I think of it anyway. But you're right, it definitely crosses over with proof of concept. But
I think it's a dose of reality in my experience. Prototyping stage is, you asked what the word means to me. Pain comes to mind as my first is my first reaction. It's the place where we've got a lot of great ideas, and it's the show me phase of, well, does your idea actually have any basis in reality? Can we make it happen, even if it's this large sort of Frankenstein system sitting on a bench with ad hoc software? But it's I mean, I say pain. It's also exciting. It's really fun to get things working in the first stages, but yeah, it really is the dose of reality of does your idea have any legs to it?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I kind of look at prototyping as being further down the process. So the way you describe it is, before you've even fully formed the idea, you're starting to put things together and see if they're going to work. Whereas I kind of think of it as, well, we've got everything in place. Now we've got to see what it looks like when we kind of switch it on.
Yeah, the word prototyping, in my opinion, has changed through the years. As you look at maybe the 30, 40, maybe 50 plus years as designers has come out of schools and go into companies, and the evolution of startups, prototyping has changed. It used to be prototyping, like going what Matthew said, is a dose of reality, right? It's to hedge your bets, minimize the risk. You prove it out.
Yep.
But through the years and my hundreds of thousands of engagements with startups, it's changed to more of MVP, right? Prototyping is essential for startups to come up from nothing. Essentially, investors want a prototype. If you want money, you got to bring a prototype, and there's no negotiation in between, right? So usually that's the beginning element of a startup. I would say, from the more senior engineers like me, prototyping used to mean you do a lot of things that work correctly, then you prototype the ones that you don't know. But these new designers, they prototype everything. So they run with it, and I think it's synonymous with the generational differences. Run fast, you might stop, but then try again real quick. So just keep running that prototypes, right? So I would say different meanings to different design generations.
Saying that a lot of startup companies and new companies, they want to get the whole system together and showcase that to their customers and talk about the ideas and start to talk about features that maybe are good and realize which ones are bad so that they can go on to the next steps. And it's just minimizing the risk.
So for my customers, prototyping is essential. Many of them deal with RF, and yeah, RF is a bit a kind of strange matter. I always say the antenna is the point where the digital theory meets the analog reality. And you do have to do prototypes to see if the RF part works smoothly, or if you run into problems there.
Yeah, so I guess
Yeah.
from a development point of view, you need to have a good idea of what you want to get from a prototype, rather than just putting it together and see if it works. You want to know why it works and why it doesn't work.
Yes, I agree. I think it's a phase between proof of concept and mass production device, because once you have tested all the functionalities with lots of elation boards and you have a bunch of hill of the various boards, interconnects, and the prototype should be the step when you design your own board and apply all these functionalities into one board and verifying it that it is according to specification.
So that's a good point. So you've got to have a good idea of what your specification is before you even start testing the prototype, because otherwise you could kind of fool yourself into thinking it works, but you haven't tested the things that you really need to evaluate.
Yeah.
I think Wallace brings up a good point. Yeah, when I was a junior engineer, I just had 1,000 ideas and I wanted to test them all. And I think the discipline later on, once you've been through a bunch of cycles, with prototyping comes with just what you said, Milan, is just going, well, what is it I need to accomplish? I need to have a spec. And then I can limit the scope of the prototype and actually get something done quicker in the design cycle. guess I was a bit frenetic when I was a junior engineer. It was just kind of like, let's try everything because it's
You
also
do see
fun.
it
Why not?
in startups too. You know,
Sure,
they typically have like one architect and then many junior engineers. And then one architect said, "No, you don't need to prototype that." And then junior, I want to prototype everything.
So true.
But I think there's some dangers with prototyping too that you need to be aware of going in, and specifically, I think a lot of prototypes end up in the final product, right? So you need to be very aware up front, you know, what you're trying to accomplish at the end, and so that you don't go off on a big tangent, right? And
Right.
sure, you got this prototype that's working, but you can't use any of it, right? You gotta redo it all. So having that vision going forward.
There's a term I use in the Valley. They call it prototype hell, where it never leads to production and just prototypes and prototypes, because it's a time sink, right? If you never end up with a real product or a true MVP, then you're just there to run prototypes, and that's no good for anybody, right?
So when you've got a prototype and you're starting to evaluate it, you shouldn't treat that prototype as the product and try to improve it. You should work out what's not right, go back to the design and go so go back a step. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of prototypes, like physical prototypes, probably end up in a drawer somewhere then, I should think, do they?
Oh yeah. I would say
right here.
I would say 10 to 100 to 1. Mix it at the end. You'll be real surprised.
But it's obviously got to be worth it, hasn't it? It's got to be worth going through those stages. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it.
Absolutely.
So in my mind, it comes back to the risk, right? I mean, you're really trying to reduce the risk. If you're doing something where you've done it 100 times and you know how to do it, you don't need to prototype that, right? I mean, you've got that knowledge, you've got that skill, just get it done. But if there's risk, you need to reduce that risk as early as possible.
That's a great point.
Sorry there, Phil, but Brian, you made a good point. I was thinking maybe I'd bring it up later, but you cracked it open. It's so often the prototype code or a piece of hardware that is only meant to demonstrate just a concept that it will work. Because it works, and we're all under time constraints, it ends up being in the final product, and you're kind of scratching your head, going, well, if I had to do it over, I would do something largely different than that. But we're under a time budget here, so that's now the working piece of hardware. That's the working code, and
I've seen it happen. Yeah,
happens all the time. I'm trying to apply more discipline early in the prototyping phase of what I demonstrate. I know someone's going to fall, like, not because the idea is great, but like, as soon as you see it working, that's the thing. So
it works. Just use that. Yeah.
It's funny. Everything's kind of forgivable in prototype because you know, the over-the-air future is coming up to, you know, everything's connected these days, so you can update it with one and two exception: security and safety. It has to be from the start, right? And then it goes tops down. But if you think of it later on, it doesn't work out like that. So hence many of these hacks that have gone on was because the example of Nest, it started out in their prototypes and nobody ever went back and fixed it, right? The security hole. And it's the after effects. So then they lose, you know, a lot of money due to brand image damage, monetary damage. You know, it's just a nightmare. So that's one of the caveats of prototype. Some of the stuff you need to do in the front, but if you're running quick, you kind of ignore it by accident. But then it's horrible to go back.
Yeah.
Right.
Or ignore it because it's really hard, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, coming back to risk, an over-the-air update is always a risk. You have to open a door and you can't close it.
Yeah, and know the air updates is something we're going to talk about a little bit later. But it's what I'm picking up from this part of the conversation is that you've got to document what you find out when you're at the prototype stage and apply that to your design rather than take it forward. And we've all done it. I know we've all done it. And you think, I will document that later, or I will remember why I did that later, and then you forget.
Yeah.
So that's a good tip.
There's always somebody asking for something more that you kind of move on and kind of don't go back. So you kind of get stuck into that kind of rushing forward that some companies get stuck into. So yeah, very much so.
And I suppose every product now is on its own life cycle. So there's always going to be a next gen, a V 2.0 or whatever. So yeah, I guess the other temptation is to say we'll sweep that up in the next version and we'll just carry on with this one as it is right now. But yeah, so top tip, document. So I mean, great advice there on why you should use a prototype. But does every new project or every new product need a new prototype or need a prototype?
Yeah, so I personally think the answer is no. I think for me, again, it comes back to risk, right? If there's risk that you can't figure something out or can't get something working, you definitely need a prototype. But if it's something you've done many times and the risk is low, I think you can just go, right into your development cycle.
You agree, Matt?
Yeah. I think it is something familiar for you that for your designers that you are making. I think the prototype phase is not unnecessary for this. But okay, there should be some precautions. But if it is known and done 100 times, so I think it's not necessary in this time.
Anybody disagree with that? Anybody think you must prototype every new product?
My opinion is sometimes it's a philosophy and sometimes it's a rule of thumb, right? If the design portion has already been proven, then ideally it should work. But many of the companies, local companies I have here in the Bay, the startups engineers change every 2 years, like their jackets. So roughly every 2 years you come to a new derivative, then the guy will want a prototype because he or she is not familiar with the design. So then, they just prototype anyway. So it's kind of mind-boggling sometimes.
Yeah, we're coming back to risk.
And it highlights the fact that a lot of this knowledge, this intellectual property, is in the minds and heads of the engineers that work in these companies.
I might have a little bit different perspective on this one. If we view prototypes just as a hardware platform, then I would agree. Yeah, you don't always need to kind of start from the ground up with a new prototype platform, but it's often software too. Prototype extends into software. It's not just hardware. And so you may have an iteration on a product and it's going to use nearly identical hardware platform, but you have some new features that are going in for that are software based. And in those cases, there's always those you don't know what you don't know until you kind of start putting things together. And I think it's good to have a little bit of skepticism about the ideas. It's kind of healthy to say, well, of course it will work. Well, then why wouldn't we give it a try? Especially if it's something that doesn't require hundreds of thousands of dollars in hardware spin. We can write some software to kind of prove out an idea. So I'm kind of in both camps on that.
Yeah, and I suppose there are two views about why you should prototype. One is to test what you've designed, and then the other is to improve what you've designed before you go to production.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a very flexible stage in the product life cycle, isn't it?
It is.
So I think there's a general kind of consensus behind the idea that perhaps you should only prototype if you absolutely need to. But how do you know that you absolutely need to? I know it comes down to risk, but how do you assess that risk?
It may come down to ideas like mission critical, if lives are on the line, things like that. I mean, developers that I talk to that are making systems that go into airplanes that fly human beings around. I mean, of course, then the answer is yes. It's always worth it because you're going to save human lives. If it's something that's, we often do development platforms, and we have the opportunity to, we made a small mistake there. This was always meant for just development. We can iterate that and put a new piece of hardware or software into the field with very low pain, low cost in most cases. And so for me, a lot of times it comes down to application.
It also goes along with what Matthew said about risk and risk averse. There's some in application, like automotive or airplanes or functional safety. It's actually built into the ISO compliance documentation. There's a place where the verification that the prototype worked must be signed off. So I think it depends on your end use. If you're making a toy and LED doesn't turn on, the engineer goes, okay. But if you're doing a surgical robot, regardless, you probably will need to make a prototype, whether you like to or not. You just as part of the ISO compliance.
So that's part of the kind of the documentation that can be audited at any time.
Right, right.
Whenever
So
you
that better
need-
not end up in a drawer somewhere then.
Yes, exactly.
Whenever you need an agency approval, you have to prototype.
So let's loop back to something we touched on earlier, over-the-air updates. So this is where the hardware and the software come together in firmware, and it's becoming more and more common and even expected, and dare I say it, a design tool to implement OTA. How do you view OTA, and how would you advise customers to use it?
Everyone's
I
quiet
would-
immediately.
So take all the time you need to think about it.
It's a big topic.
Yeah, I would be reluctant.
Well, I mean, I think it's definitely, it's definitely a tool that you're going to use to fix bugs and roll out new features and things like that. I personally wouldn't rely on it early on to fix critical bugs, right? I mean, every organization needs to have their quality standards, and you need to meet those quality standards before you roll anything out, right? Whatever that standard is. I think, it's important. It's important that you don't release anything with bad quality, that, if you know about it. But I mean, over-the-air updates are definitely there to help you fix those bugs that they're there, right? It's hard to write, perfect software. And for rolling out features in the future, I think it's a critical tool.
Yeah, you're right. It's a really critical tool and really helpful to kind of tweak the design. But if you don't get, going back to a point before, if you don't get the security right and the able to open and close that door properly right at the beginning, you can let people in, and that causes havoc for your company. So it's something that you probably want to kind of use later on within the system. You want to get it all right first before you kind of rely on that as the escape, really. Fixing those little bugs. It's if you don't get the security right on that, you're going to be in trouble.
I think OTA, in all honesty, OTA is very hard. And there's, at certain companies, there's just one gentleman, one engineer who's just responsible for OTA. Believe it or not, it's that big of a scenario. It reminds me of a discussion I had with a gray hat hacker at a RSA conference. I asked him his opinion on all these autonomous cars are coming out. It's wonderful, but from his side, it's great business because it's greenfield for all the hackers that'll come out, and then all the gray hackers that needs to have them thwarted. So from his view, OTA is wonderful because it's one of the lesser known, more complex topics in design engineering, believe it or not. And I think even now the autonomous car industry is really still not ready for it, right? Once those cars roam around, once it's in the wild, it's very hard to fix. Very, very hard.
So if you don't prototype anything else, make sure you prototype your over-the-air updates and make sure it's secure.
Exactly. There's no paradigm where you're over secure. Believe it or not, it's all always under secure. That's always the case.
I think OTA can often it gives a connotation that you have a product deployed in the field and you have to deliver updates to that over the network, which is often, that's the main use case. But we're seeing a newer use case now. It's not just the remote work office that COVID has brought, but it's the expense of prototype, honestly. Our group develops 5G and millimeter wave applications, and the equipment alone for testing that is millions of dollars. So you have to, there's no just like a $50 USB attached scope and you're going to do the work. It's not a reality anymore. So our team works remotely, and we've got a remote lab where we've got prototype device under test sitting around millions of dollars of test equipment. And there we're doing over the wire, I guess, technically, over the wire network updates as we're prototyping and testing different versions of software, pieces of hardware. So it's actually, it's part of my daily routine in prototyping to do OTA and OTW updates.
Yeah, and some companies are taking advantage of OTA. We're talking about prototyping,
Yeah.
but adding completely new features to
That's right.
products.
Yeah.
Example, Tesla, right? If you want autonomous driving, you can buy it, but really what that does is it downloads the package, the autonomous driving package, and it puts a new feature in your car that wasn't there previously. I heard Ford and GM are doing the same things now, right? That the hardware is already built in, but the functionality, you need to pay for it, for added
Yeah.
features.
That introduces a whole lot of considerations, doesn't it? Because you can do over-the-air upgrades.
Yes.
So there's going to be many more versions of a product, depending on what features you've upgraded with. And then you get something like autonomous driving as a package. They need to have tested that in every iteration of those possible products that you've created through those upgrades.
Right.
So I mean, there's no other way of doing it except with a prototype that you can just keep reconfiguring.
Right.
This is another place where the engineering prototype ends up in the final product often, where you think, well, I've got test engineers in the field, and as they're testing different features, I can over the air download a new feature, and then they can spend weeks testing it in the desert, in the case of an automobile.
Right.
And unless you're careful, that very same mechanism that you built in just for engineering test and prototype finds its way into the end product, and then something fails in the field because it was never tested to be robust or secure. That's your point, Wallace.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this has been great, getting your expert opinion and insights into why we prototype, why we should prototype, what we should get from prototyping. So I want to say thank you for your time. But before I let you go, I just want to have a quick fire round of yes, no answers. And I suspect I know what the answers will be, but let's do it anyway. So would you recommend prototyping to a customer when trying out a new component or solution for a new product or function? Yes.
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 Absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Developing a new product or function using a familiar component or solution?
Yes.
Not necessarily.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah,
necessarily.
not necessarily.
Trust but verify.
Exactly.
Okay. How about learning about a new product or solution for a
Yes.
new product or function?
Yeah,
For
I'll
sure.
go yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Very useful.
And the last one, if the budget and timescale allows, you should prototype regardless.
If you've got the time, then yes.
I would.
I think
It's not
it
like
is.
common.
I think
If you have the
because
money,
the schedule's always going
you go to vacation, you should prototype.
Which company is this?
Exactly. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And
Awesome.
Thank you.
thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Avnet will be back with another roundtable with our engineers soon.